The consensus among the elder species, etched into the crystalline archives of the Cygnian Concord and whispered across the multidimensional markets of the Cthar Collective, was absolute. Humanity, a fledgling star-faring race, was a charming anomaly. Primitive in their emotional complexity, yet surprisingly tenacious in their localized squabbles. But when it came to true, existential frontier colonization, they were deemed fragile. Their physiology, their delicate biospheres, their inherent need for atmospheric stability and temperate climates, they were built for comfort, not conquest. They were meat, soft and vulnerable, incapable of truly claiming the galaxy's unforgiving scars. They spoke of worlds like Xylos Prime. They called them death planets. Not merely uninhabitable, but actively hostile. Places where the very fabric of existence seemed to conspire against life. Worlds with gravitational pulls that would crush the densest alloys into dust. Atmospheres so saturated with corrosive agents that molecular bonds simply unraveled upon contact. Continents perpetually scourged by biome-killer storms, hurricanes of superheated plasma or cryovapors that stripped planets bare, reshaping geology with the casual indifference of a celestial sculptor. Even the most warlike species, the ones who reveled in territorial disputes and resource acquisition, drew a definitive, non-negotiable line at these celestial charnel houses. These were the galaxy's forgotten tombs, sterile monuments to cosmic indifference. And for eons, that was precisely what they remained. Until humanity turned its gaze. The initial probes to Xylos Prime were met with derision from the wider galactic community. Its statistics were public record. Surface gravity averaging 3.8 standard GS, an atmospheric pressure of 14,000 hectopascals, composed primarily of hydrogen fluoride and methane, with trace elements of exotic, highly reactive xenohalogens. The planet's core, an unstable maelstrom of hyperdense iron and nickel, generated a magnetosphere so chaotic it twisted incoming stellar radiation into lethal auroras of pure energy, frying anything organic within seconds. The surface temperature fluctuated wildly, from superchilled cryogenic plains where nitrogen froze solid to volcanic fissures spewing molten silicates that flowed like rivers of incandescent glass. A world designed by a mad god to repel all life. Yet, humanity saw something else. Not a tomb, but a crucible. Not a barrier, but a challenge. The Axiom Protocol, drafted by the newly formed Terran Unification Directorate, was blunt. Where life is impossible, humanity will make it inevitable. Adaptation is not a choice, it is our prime directive. The first colony attempt, Outpost Sharon, was a name whispered with a mixture of awe and horror even among human ranks. A single, colossal orbital platform, the Indomitable Bastion, served as the initial staging ground, deploying automated heavy-lift shuttles carrying prefabricated habitat modules. The casualty rate on those initial drops was astronomical. Not from enemy fire, but from the planet itself. Crushing gravity warped hull plating. Acidic rain dissolved primary seals. Unpredictable atmospheric currents tore modules from their tethers, sending them plummeting into the incandescent fissures below. Log entry, Cycle 003, Outpost Sharon deployment, loss of 47 modules. Grav stress fracture on Module 11 Gamma. Atmospheric dissolution of Module 23 Delta. Xenohalogen saturation breach in Module 9 Epsilon. Personnel Kia, 8,342. All automated. No human contact with surface. Yet. The elder species watched, bemused. This was not a colonization attempt, it was an act of self-immolation. They expected retreat, a humbling acknowledgement of biological limits. What they received was a chilling, relentless escalation. For every module lost, 2 more were deployed. For every structural failure, engineers on the Indomitable Bastion iterated, redesigned, forged new alloys in zero-G forges, pushing the boundaries of material science with a desperate, singular focus. They developed grav spines, colossal, self-regulating countergravitational anchors that burrowed deep into Xylos Prime's crust, neutralizing localized gravity wells for the foundation of new structures. They engineered atmocleaners, not to purify the air, but to filter and recycle breathable oxygen and nitrogen from the hostile elements, creating microenvironments of relative safety within heavily shielded conduits. These weren't terraforming attempts, they were acts of defiance, building through the storm, not around it. Log entry, Cycle 087, Outpost Sharon deployment, first successful deployment of habitat node, Prometheus. Grav spines holding at 98% efficiency. Atmocleaners maintaining level 4 environmental integrity. Surface operations initiated. Automated drones only. No human contact with surface. Still. That no human contact was a point of dark humor among the Terrans. They were sending machines to die, millions of credits of advanced robotics and exotic materials dissolving into the hostile soup, just to prove a point. But the point was being proven. Slowly, agonizingly, a tiny, fortified blister of human infrastructure began to coalesce on Xylos Prime's brutal surface. It was a monument to attrition, a testament to a species that refused to acknowledge impossible. The galaxy watched, no longer with amusement, but with a growing, unsettling fascination. This wasn't the delicate, emotional race they had catalogued. This was something else entirely. This was a species that saw the universe's most brutal challenges not as a deterrent, but as an invitation. A species that learned not by avoiding pain, but by embracing it, dissecting it, and turning its very essence into a new form of strength. The first Death Planet was not conquered, it was endured, subsumed, and in that brutal process, something within humanity itself began to change. That still, in the last log entry was a prelude, a temporal placeholder before the inevitable. The Terran Unification Directorate's internal projections had always factored in human deployment. Automated drones could only collect data, construct foundations. True colonization, true ownership, demanded boots on the ground, even if those boots were encased in hyperdense, self-repairing alloys. The call went out for the Stygian Dawn contingent, a name that echoed the grim reality of the mission. They were not volunteers in the traditional sense, they were the apex of human resilience, honed by generations of frontier expansion across less forgiving, but still tame, worlds. Their psychological profiles indicated an unnerving affinity for high-stress environments, a genetic predisposition for what some xenopsychologists termed adversity-seeking behavior. Each member of the Stygian Dawn contingent was encased within an Aegis pattern environmental enclosure, a personal fortress of durasteel and ceramite. These weren't mere suits, they were ambulatory life support systems, integrating a localized grav nullifier field that reduced Xylos Prime's crushing 3.8 GS to a manageable 1.2, a simulated Earth normal. Their external plating shrugged off hydrogen fluoride rain like a minor inconvenience, self-sealing microfractures with polymer gels. Internal atmospherics recycled processed xenohalogens into a breathable, if somewhat metallic-tasting, oxygen-nitrogen mix. Visors projected real-time environmental data, structural integrity readouts, and topological maps, overlaid with thermal and atmospheric distortion filters. To step onto Xylos Prime was not merely to endure, it was to become a part of its brutal ballet, albeit a heavily armored, immensely capable part. The first human step onto Xylos Prime's surface was not televised for galactic consumption. It was a private, internal moment, captured by suit cams and relayed directly to the indomitable Bastion. The dust, a fine, corrosive particulate, crunched under the Aegis pattern boots. The air, even within the filtered suit, vibrated with the constant roar of plasma weepers and the distant thunder of cryoserpents, meteorological phenomena unique to Xylos Prime, now given Terran designations. The light, filtered through the perpetual atmospheric haze, was a sickly orange-green, casting long, distorted shadows of the newly erected Prometheus nexus. This wasn't a pristine, untouched wilderness, it was a battleground, scarred by the planet's relentless assault and humanity's equally relentless counter-assault. Log entry, Cycle 101, Stygian Dawn contingent deployment, first direct human surface contact successful. Minor suit integrity alerts, immediately auto-repaired. Grav nullifiers holding. Initial sensation, heavy. Secondary sensation, exhilarating. Personnel report no disorientation. Proceeding with Nexus expansion protocols. We are here. Finally. The exhilarating was a curious note. It wasn't the relief of survival, but the thrill of direct engagement. These pioneers didn't just survive, they thrived on the edge. They moved with a purpose, their grav nullifiers humming, their Aegis pattern suits a defiant silhouette against the chaotic sky. They began to excavate, not with drills, but with focused plasma torches, cutting through the planet's resilient crust, burrowing deeper. They sought not merely shelter, but resources, the hyperdense alloys, the exotic xenohalogens, the unique geothermal energies that fueled Xylos Prime's fury. They would take the planet's very essence and turn it against itself. The Prometheus Nexus began to spread, a network of armored tunnels and fortified nodes radiating outwards from the initial habitat. They encountered new challenges, underground lava flows that necessitated rapid rerouting of subterranean conduits, pockets of hyperpressurized methane that exploded when breached, geological formations that shifted under the constant grav stress, threatening to shear away entire sections of their nascent infrastructure. Each obstacle was met not with retreat, but with innovative engineering solutions. Plasma borers were developed, capable of tunneling through molten rock. Resonance dampeners were deployed to stabilize shifting fault lines. They weren't just building, they were integrating their structures into the planet's violent processes, turning its energy into their own. Log entry, Cycle 197, Prometheus Nexus expansion, new resource veins identified, igneous ore, hyperconductive silicate, and Vex gas, reactive xenohalogen. Both exceptionally volatile. Extraction protocols initiated. Loss of 2 automated drilling rigs to Vex gas pressure rupture. Engineers developing new, containment weave, for future extraction. Human teams are on site, overseeing manual deployment of resonance dampeners near active fault lines. Conditions, extreme, but manageable. Manageable. That was the Terran understatement. The galactic community, still observing through long-range sensors, saw something far beyond manageable. They saw a species that was not merely adapting to a death world, but actively taming it, bending its very nature to their will. The Cygnian Concord's deep space observers noted the shift in Xylos Prime's energy signature. Not a reduction in its fury, but a redirection. Its geothermal output, its atmospheric electrical storms, its very gravitational fluctuations, all were being subtly, yet undeniably, harnessed. The Prometheus Nexus was not just a colony, it was becoming a parasitic organism, drawing sustenance from the planet's destructive power. The elder species had initially dismissed humanity as soft. Now, they re-evaluated. They saw a species that had transformed pain into power, adversity into advantage. Xylos Prime, the first death planet, was not merely being colonized, it was being absorbed. And the most unsettling realization for the observing galaxy was that humanity was not the same species that had first emerged from its blue-green cradle. The crucible of Xylos Prime was reforging them, hardening their resolve, sharpening their ingenuity, and imbuing them with an almost terrifying indifference to suffering. They had been deemed fragile. Now, they were becoming something else entirely. Something relentless. The Prometheus Nexus, once a mere blister on Xylos Prime's scarred hide, became a sprawling, subterranean metropolis. Its tunnels, once merely conduits, now housed vast industrial complexes, forging new alloys from the hyperdense igneous ore, refining the volatile Vex gas into a potent, clean energy source. The planet's own destructive energies, its crushing gravity and corrosive atmosphere, were not just endured, they were actively farmed. Gravitational fluctuations were siphoned by kinetic converters, atmospheric xenohalogens were broken down in colossal processing towers, their raw elemental power harnessed. The storms that once threatened to tear apart human structures now merely powered them, a constant, brutal, yet utterly reliable source of energy. Log entry, Cycle 312, Prometheus Nexus operations, energy surplus at 120% capacity. Atmospheric processing units exceeding projected efficiency. Vex gas refinement output stable. Structural integrity of Nexus sectors 7 beta through 12 gamma holding at peak parameters despite localized plasma storm activity. New storm siphon technology proving invaluable for direct energy capture. Xylos Prime is no longer a drain, it is a power source. The term power source was a chilling redefinition. It implied not just survival, but exploitation. Humanity wasn't just living on Xylos Prime, they were living off it, extracting its very lifeblood, twisting its malevolent processes into tools for their own expansion. The Aegis pattern suits evolved, too. No longer just protective enclosures, they became extensions of the wearer, integrating neural interfaces that allowed for direct manipulation of heavy machinery with thought alone. The grav nullifier fields became more precise, capable of localized repulsion, allowing individuals to navigate the planet's treacherous terrain with uncanny agility, almost dancing through the maelstrom. The psychological impact on the Stygian Dawn contingent was profound. Generations of living beneath a sky that constantly threatened to rip them apart, walking on ground that sought to crush them, had honed a new breed of human. They exhibited an almost pathological calm in the face of environmental catastrophe, a quiet competence forged in the crucible of constant threat. Their senses sharpened, their reflexes honed. They could interpret the subtle shifts in atmospheric pressure, the faint tremors of a distant plasma weeper, with an innate understanding that bordered on instinct. Pain, once a warning, became a data point. Hardship, a pathway to innovation. The elder species, still observing, struggled to categorize this transformation. The Cygnian Concord, known for their meticulous xenological studies, revised their profiles on humanity weekly. Their initial, fragile, emotional assessment was replaced with adaptable, resilient. Then, unsettlingly tenacious. Finally, a classification appeared in the classified archives of the Cthar Collective. Predatory adapters, displays aggressive resource acquisition and environmental subjugation. They had never seen a species so utterly redefine its own biological limitations, not through genetic engineering or cybernetic augmentation, though those were present, but through sheer, unyielding force of will and relentless iteration. One incident, minor in its immediate impact but profound in its implication, became a whispered legend among the observing species. A deep-core geological survey team, operating far from the nexus, suffered a catastrophic resonance dampener failure. The ground beneath them began to buckle, threatening to collapse their Aegis pattern suits under the unmitigated 3.8 GS. For 72 agonizing hours, before rescue could arrive, they were pinned, unable to move, their internal systems straining, every muscle fiber screaming in protest. When they were finally extracted, critically injured but alive, their first demand was not for medical attention, but for the data logs. They wanted to understand why the dampener failed, to learn from the planet's assault. There was no panic, no despair, only an intense, almost joyful, intellectual curiosity in the face of agonizing, potentially lethal, pressure. It was a chilling testament to their transformed mindset. Log entry, Cycle 450, Stygian Dawn Contingent Psychological Report, Subject Delta 9, following Gravlock incident, displays elevated pain threshold and diminished stress response to extreme pressure. Cognitive functions unimpaired, analytical capacity enhanced. Subject reports clarity during period of maximum grav stress. Recommendation: further study of adversity-induced neuroplasticity. Initial findings suggest prolonged exposure to extreme environments may unlock dormant human potential. The dormant human potential was the real terror for the elder species. It wasn't just about conquering a planet, it was about conquering themselves, evolving into something uniquely suited for the galaxy's most brutal corners. Xylos Prime, the supposed death world, was now a thriving human industrial hub, its surface dotted with glittering, shielded structures, its subterranean depths humming with activity. Its storms were not endured, but rode. Its gravity was not resisted, but manipulated. Humanity had not merely survived, they had owned it. The flag of the Terran Unification Directorate, a stylized comet piercing a star, now flew atop the highest spire of the Prometheus Nexus, a defiant beacon against the hellish sky. And it was then, with Xylos Prime firmly in their grasp, that humanity turned its relentless gaze towards the next impossible challenge. The galaxy held its breath. With Xylos Prime transformed from an impossible grave into a self-sustaining industrial engine, the Terran Unification Directorate's gaze, now sharpened by the fires of its first crucible, turned to the next insurmountable obstacle. The galactic cartographers had long ago charted a world known as designation C-701. To the Cygnian Concord, it was the Great Silence, a frozen testament to cosmic indifference. To the Cthar Collective, it was simply Void's Maw, a place where light and warmth went to die. Humanity, however, gave it a new name, Acheron. And Acheron made Xylos Prime look like a pleasant summer retreat. Acheron was a rogue planet, flung free of its star system eons ago, drifting through the intergalactic void. Its surface temperature hovered just above absolute zero, a frigid -270 degrees Celsius. Its atmosphere, a wispy veneer of frozen nitrogen and methane, offered no protection from the raw, unfiltered cosmic radiation that bathed its surface. The planet's core, unlike Xylos Prime's churning inferno, was a dying ember, its geological activity minimal, offering no geothermal bounty. Instead, its crust was permeated by exotic, hyperdense cryocrystals, constantly forming and fracturing under the immense internal pressures, releasing bursts of hard radiation and sub-zero shockwaves that propagated through the solid rock. Any organic matter touching Acheron's surface would not merely freeze, it would shatter, its molecular bonds snapping under the extreme cold and radiation bombardment. The elder species had long used Acheron as a cautionary tale, a natural barrier against reckless expansion. No known life form, not even the most resilient extremophiles, could endure its conditions. But humanity, now emboldened by their triumph on Xylos Prime, saw it differently. They saw a resource, the cryocrystals, theorized to contain exotic matter, and the vast, unmolested deposits of rare heavy elements, preserved by the absolute cold. And more importantly, they saw another challenge, another opportunity to push the boundaries of what was deemed possible. The Cryoforge initiative was launched with a brutal efficiency born from Xylos Prime's lessons. There were no initial orbital platforms, no hesitant probes. The approach was direct, savage. Colossal, Acheron breakers, modified from the deep-core tunneling machines developed on Xylos Prime, were launched directly into the planet's upper crust, their hulls supercooled to near absolute zero, their internal systems protected by layers of radiation-absorbing ferrogel. These were not exploratory vessels, they were spearheads, designed to burrow immediately, to plunge deep beneath the lethal surface, seeking refuge and resources in the planet's stable, if still unimaginably cold, mantle. Log entry, Cycle 007, Acheron Breaker deployment, Breaker 1 has achieved mantle depth penetration. Surface radiation levels, critical. External temperature, -271.5 degrees Celsius. Internal systems holding at nominal. Minor hull microfractures detected from cryocrystal shear, immediately auto-repaired by ferrogel. First resource vein identified, glacier dust, superdense elemental ice. Initiating automated extraction. No human contact with surface. Ever. The ever was a significant departure from Xylos Prime's yet. Acheron's surface was truly beyond human endurance, even in an Aegis pattern suit. The colonization strategy for Acheron was predicated entirely on subterranean living, on building vast, self-contained caverns where artificial light and warmth were the only constants. The Acheron breakers carved out immense galleries, their internal plasma cutters melting pathways through the supercooled rock, the resultant heat carefully managed to prevent catastrophic thermal shock. The extracted glacier dust, a substance of incredible density and purity, was processed into a new generation of superconductors and high-energy fuel cells. The challenges were immediate and relentless. The constant cryocrystal fracturing created unpredictable seismic events, threatening to collapse newly excavated tunnels. The omnipresent radiation slowly degraded even the most advanced shielding, requiring constant repair and recalibration. There was no storm siphon equivalent here, energy had to be generated internally, through miniature fusion reactors, fed by the very glacier dust they extracted. It was a closed, self-contained ecosystem of cold, hard resilience. Log entry, Cycle 093, Subterranean Nexus construction, Central Nexus, Chronovault, nearing completion. Primary fusion core, Everfrost, achieving stable output. Radiation shielding at 99.8% integrity. Cryocrystal shear events still a concern, deploying resonance nullifiers, derived from Xylos Prime Tech, to stabilize geological stresses. Initial human deployment to Chronovault imminent. Personnel acclimating to deep cold protocols. Morale determined. The deep cold protocols involve not just physical acclimatization, but a profound psychological shift. Living in perpetual darkness, illuminated only by artificial light, surrounded by the crushing silence of an alien, frozen world, demanded a unique mental fortitude. The humans deployed to Acheron, the Polaris vanguard, were even more stoic than their Xylos Prime counterparts. They were a people of quiet efficiency, their movements precise, their communications terse. They moved through their cavernous, artificially lit world with the grace of deep-sea creatures, utterly at home in the void. The elder species observed with a new, unsettling understanding. Humanity wasn't just adapting to the environment, they were adapting to the lack of environment. They were mastering the void, making a home where no home could exist. Acheron was not being colonized, it was being hollowed out, its frigid heart turned into a vibrant, if alien, human stronghold. The galaxy had dismissed them as fragile, then as tenacious. Now, the new classification, whispered in the hushed halls of galactic diplomacy, was inexorable. They had taken the death of a star and turned it into the genesis of a new human frontier. The galaxy, still reeling from humanity's audacious conquest of Acheron's frozen heart, barely had time to recalibrate its threat assessments before the Terran Unification Directorate announced its next target. This world was not known for its crushing gravity or its absolute zero temperatures, but for something far more insidious, its temporal instability. Galactic cartographers, usually meticulous in their designations, had simply marked it as Anomalous Zone 9, a cosmic exclusion area. The Cygnian Concord, in their hushed debates, referred to it as the Labyrinth of Moments. The Cthar Collective, in their blunt practicality, called it the Chronal Tomb. Humanity, with its grim poetic flair, christened it Kronos' Veil. Kronos' Veil orbited a binary star system, but its true terror stemmed from a unique confluence of exotic matter and a massive, unseen singularity buried deep within its mantle. This singularity warped the very fabric of spacetime around the planet, creating localized temporal distortions that defied all known physics. Days could pass in mere seconds for an observer, while moments stretched into agonizing centuries for those trapped within a distortion field. Ecosystems were non-existent, any life that attempted to root would either age into dust in an instant or exist in an endless, frozen loop, unable to perceive the flow of time. Ships that dared to approach would vanish, their atoms scattering across divergent timelines, or reappear eons later, ghost ships of rusted metal and forgotten purpose. Even light itself struggled, shimmering and bending in impossible ways, making navigation a nightmare. For millennia, Kronos' Veil had served as a natural barrier, a cosmic warning against hubris. No species had ever conceived of colonizing such a place. It was not merely deadly, it was existentially terrifying. But humanity, now forged in the crucibles of Xylos Prime and Acheron, saw not a barrier, but a unique resource, the very temporal anomalies themselves. The Chronos Lock Protocol was initiated, an endeavor that even hardened Terran engineers admitted was a bit ambitious, even for us. The strategy was radical. Instead of trying to stabilize the temporal distortions, humanity aimed to ride them. They developed EVM skippers, specialized, heavily shielded vessels equipped with experimental phase shields that allowed them to briefly desynchronize from local time, surfing the temporal currents. These ships didn't land, they inserted, phasing into existence within a precise, fleeting temporal window. Their primary objective, to locate and anchor to areas of relatively stable temporal flow, pockets where the distortions were less violent, less immediately fatal. Log entry, Cycle 001, EVM skipper insertion, Skipper 01, Tempest Fugit, initiated phase shield. Temporal drift detected, plus 4.7 centuries/local second. Shield integrity holding. Insertion window closing. Destination, Sector Gamma 9, theoretical, temporal eddy. High probability of quantum decoherence. Wish us luck, or rather, wish us existence. The temporal eddies were pockets where the singularity's influence created a stable, albeit accelerated, temporal flow. Here, time moved faster, sometimes by a factor of hundreds or even thousands, but at a consistent rate. The challenge was not just survival, but accelerated construction. What took years to build on Earth would take mere days or hours for the colonists, but the colonists themselves would age at an equivalent rate. The solution, derived from the deep-cold protocols of Acheron and the self-repairing materials of Xylos Prime, was ingenious: stasis pods. These pods, deployed en masse by the EVM skippers, were not for cryosleep, but for temporal preservation. When a section of the chrononexus, as the new colony was called, was complete, the builders would cycle into stasis pods, their biological time flow returning to normal, while automated systems, operating at accelerated rates, continued the construction. Then, they would emerge, weeks or months later in their own subjective time, to find centuries of work completed around them. It was a brutal, disorienting process, a constant battle against the relentless march of time, but it worked. Log entry, Cycle 087, Chrononexus construction, Primary Nexus Spire, EVM anchor online. Phase shield generators maintaining stable localized temporal field. External time flow, 1 Earth year equals 12.3 Nexus days. Internal stasis pod cycling initiated for 70% of personnel. Automated construction of secondary conduits proceeding at optimal pace. Psychological impact of temporal leaps under review. Initial reports, disorientation, but high operational efficiency. The psychological impact was indeed profound. The chronosentinels, as the colonists were known, lived lives punctuated by vast, subjective gaps. They would enter a pod, exit, and find their children grown, their friends aged, entire historical epochs of the galaxy having passed in what felt like a blink. Yet, they adapted. Their memories became compartmentalized, their sense of linearity fluid. They learned to operate with an unnerving detachment, focusing on the immediate task, knowing that the future would arrive for them in an instant. They developed a unique, almost zen-like patience, coupled with an explosive, hyper-efficient work ethic when active. The elder species, their sensors straining to pierce Kronos' veil's temporal distortions, saw fragmented, impossible glimpses, structures appearing and vanishing, entire cities seeming to materialize from nothingness. Their xenopsychologists, once so confident in their assessments, were now in disarray. This was not merely adaptation, it was an active embrace of temporal madness. Humanity wasn't just surviving, they were exploiting the very chaos of time, turning its disorienting effects into a tool for accelerated expansion. The Cthar Collective, for the first time in their history, issued a formal advisory: humanity is not a species to be contained, it is a force to be avoided. Its methods defy logic, its resilience borders on the pathological. The more impossible the world, the more fiercely they seem to claim it. Kronos' veil, once a cosmic anomaly, was now becoming a hub of temporal research, its very instability a resource. The chronosentinels, living their strange, accelerated lives, were extracting exotic matter from the singularity's periphery, developing technologies that manipulated spacetime itself. The galaxy had thought humans couldn't colonize harsh worlds. Now, they own three death planets. And humanity, forever changed by the trials, was already looking for the next impossible challenge, their hardened gaze relentless, their will unbroken. The galactic community, a sprawling tapestry of 1,000 sentient species, had always prided itself on its comprehensive understanding of emergent civilizations. Their vast datanets, meticulously curated over millennia, contained predictive models for every known evolutionary path, every technological singularity, every likely response to first contact and interstellar expansion. Humanity, however, had shattered these models with the brutal efficiency of a grav-spine-splitting bedrock. The initial classification of fragile had been discarded, replaced by tenacious, then inexorable, and now, a new, unsettling term began to circulate within the most secure diplomatic channels: apex adapters. It was a designation that carried less scientific objectivity and more the chill of dawning realization. The Cygnian Concord's leading xenopsychologists, their multifaceted brains processing unimaginable datasets, coined the term crucible syndrome to describe the observed transformation of the human psyche. It wasn't just physical endurance, it was a profound rewiring of their very cognitive and emotional frameworks. Humans who had spent cycles on Xylos Prime developed an almost preternatural calm in the face of environmental collapse, their sensory input filtering out the overwhelming noise of the plasma storms, focusing only on critical data. Their minds became exquisitely attuned to subtle shifts in atmospheric pressure and gravitational flux, interpreting them not as threats, but as environmental cues, like a predator reading the wind. On Acheron, the Polaris vanguard had cultivated an inner silence that bordered on the monastic. Living in perpetual, artificial light within the chronovault, surrounded by the crushing silence of absolute zero and the constant, invisible threat of radiation, they developed an unnerving patience. Their movements were economical, their communications terse, their focus absolute. They learned to find patterns in the chaotic fracturing of cryocrystals, predicting shifts in the deep crust with an intuition that baffled even their own advanced sensors. A Cthar scout ship, attempting a clandestine long-range scan, once picked up a single human thought pattern from Acheron's depths: the void has its own rhythm. One merely needs to listen with the bone, not the ear. It was immediately flagged as an anomaly, an insight so alien in its simplicity, yet so terrifying in its implication. Then there were the chronosentinels of Kronos' Veil. Their minds, constantly exposed to temporal distortions and subjective jumps through centuries, developed a fluid, nonlinear perception of time. They could process information from vast historical data logs with the same ease as a real-time feed, their memories compartmentalized into distinct subjective epochs. Their problem-solving skills became terrifyingly efficient. They would leap forward, observe the outcome of a hypothetical solution, then leap back to implement the optimized version. This, temporal debugging, made their engineering and strategic planning almost flawless, leaving their galactic rivals perpetually a step behind, struggling to comprehend how humanity could consistently anticipate unforeseen variables. One internal Terran log, found by a particularly persistent Cygnian data miner, contained a dry remark from a chronosentinel after a particularly complex temporal simulation: "It's remarkably inefficient to only live in one present. The future is so much more informative." The unique resources from these three death planets now fueled humanity's rapid expansion. Ignis ore from Xylos Prime, refined through its own violent geothermal energy, produced hyperconductive alloys that formed the backbone of new starship hulls, impervious to previously crippling energy attacks. Glacier dust from Acheron, processed in the absolute cold of the chronovault, yielded superdense power cells and reactionless drives that granted Terran vessels unprecedented speed and endurance. And the exotic matter from Kronos' Veil, carefully extracted and stabilized, was leading to breakthroughs in localized temporal manipulation, allowing for instantaneous FTL jumps and, terrifyingly, potential defensive applications that could shunt incoming attacks into non-existence. Humanity was no longer just a species that survived harsh worlds, it was a species defined by them. The populations on Xylos Prime, Acheron, and Kronos' Veil developed distinct, yet interconnected, subcultures, each embodying the spirit of their brutal home. The Xylos-born were boisterous, direct, thriving on the constant roar of their world. The Acheron dwellers were quiet, introspective, with an almost unnerving calm. The Veil leapers were detached, brilliant, their minds operating on multiple temporal planes. Yet, they were all unmistakably human, bound by the shared crucible of their existence. The galaxy had dismissed them as too soft for the true frontier. Now, humanity not only owned three death planets, but they were using them as launchpads, forging a new empire not through conquest of other species, but through the subjugation of the universe's most hostile environments. Their flag, once a symbol of a nascent starfaring race, now flew atop three impossible strongholds, a silent, defiant declaration to the cosmos. The elder species, once so confident in their dominance, now watched with a growing, profound unease. Humanity wasn't seeking conflict, they were merely existing, and in their existence, on those impossible worlds, they posed a challenge more fundamental than any armada. They were proving that the universe's most savage places were not barriers, but proving grounds. And humanity had proven itself, over and over again, relentlessly. The galaxy, vast and ancient, had developed a complex etiquette for newly emergent species. There were protocols for first contact, for integration into the galactic economy, for the measured sharing of technological advancements. Humanity had bypassed all of it. Their expansion was not a measured, diplomatic outreach, but a relentless, self-contained phenomenon. They didn't ask for permission, they simply took the places no one else wanted, the places that actively repelled life. The Cygnian Concord, masters of diplomacy, dispatched a series of observation envoys, not to make contact, but to understand. Their reports, filled with detached scientific analysis, nonetheless conveyed a growing sense of existential dread. Observation Log, Envoy Unit 7, Quadrant Sol Prime, Cycle 789. Subject, Human Expansion. Data indicates continued internal refinement of Crucible Syndrome adaptation. Physiological markers show increased bone density and muscle resilience in xylosborn, suggesting active genetic expression in response to sustained hypergravitic stress. Neural pathways in Akron dwellers display enhanced synaptic plasticity, allowing for rapid processing of complex, low-sensory data streams, a form of sensory deprivation hyperfocus. Veil leapers exhibit unique temporal lobe development, supporting multilayered temporal memory retrieval and predictive modeling. Conclusion: humanity is not merely adapting, it is evolving at an accelerated rate under extreme environmental pressure. This evolution was not theoretical. It was evident in every aspect of Terran operations. The Atlas carriers, new classes of starships forged from Ignisor, were not merely resilient, they were practically indestructible, shrugging off kinetic impacts that would shatter lesser vessels. Their internal fusion cores, powered by glacier dust, allowed them to traverse vast interstellar distances without resupply, their energy output so immense it warped local spacetime, making them almost impossible to track. And their navigation systems, integrated with the Veil Leaper's temporal algorithms, could plot optimal jump points through previously impassable gravitic anomalies, allowing them to appear in systems thought unapproachable, with an unnerving precision. The elder species, for all their millennia of accumulated wisdom, found themselves utterly unprepared for a species that treated the universe's most lethal phenomena as training grounds. They had tried to offer humanitarian aid during the early Xylos Prime deployments, only to be politely, but firmly, rebuffed. "We learn through adversity," a Terran communique had stated, "your comfort would only weaken us." It was a statement that baffled the Cthar, who valued strength above all, but understood it only through conflict, not through self-inflicted hardship. The Cygnian Concord, attempting to engage humanity in scientific exchange, found that the Terran scientists from the Death planets operated on principles so alien to their own, derived from such extreme conditions, that common ground was elusive. A Xylos-born engineer, when asked about conventional atmospheric shielding, simply stated, "Why shield when you can rebuild stronger?" Failure is data. An Akron dweller, presented with a complex logistical problem, would often retreat into a sensory deprivation chamber for days, emerging with a solution so elegant and brutal in its efficiency that it bordered on prescience. And a Veil Leaper, discussing historical events, might reference futures that had not yet occurred for the Concord, their understanding of causality fundamentally different. This was not just about technology, it was about a philosophical chasm. The elder species built their civilizations on stability, on the avoidance of risk, on the careful preservation of life. Humanity, forged in the fires of Xylos Prime, the depths of Acheron, and the temporal chaos of Kronos' Veil, built theirs on the embrace of risk, on the relentless pursuit of challenge, on the understanding that life, true life, was found not in comfort, but in the white-hot forge of survival. Then came the null storms. These were not atmospheric phenomena, but intergalactic singularities, rogue tiers in spacetime that periodically swept through sectors, consuming everything in their path, light, matter, even the very concept of existence. They were the universe's ultimate eraser, and all known species simply evacuated systems in their projected path, abandoning entire worlds. It was the one truly insurmountable force. Until a null storm began to gather speed, its destructive path projected directly through a sector containing a valuable, ancient Cygnian data archive world. Evacuation protocols were initiated, but the sheer scale of the data, the historical significance, meant millions of cycles of information would be lost. The Cygnian Concord sent out a desperate, unprecedented plea for assistance. Every species, every empire, politely declined. The null storm was absolute. But then, a single Terran Atlas carrier, the Crucible Ascendant, deviated from its established trade route, its glacier dust-driven engines pushing it to impossible speeds. It entered the projected path of the null storm. The galactic sensors watched, transfixed, expecting annihilation. What they saw defied every known law of physics, every predictive model. The Crucible Ascendant did not attempt to outrun the storm, nor did it attempt to shield itself. Instead, it deployed a shimmering, complex field generated by its Veil Leaper navigators, a field that seemed to bend the very edge of the null storm. It didn't stop it, it redirected it, subtly, infinitesimally, but enough. The null storm veered, missing the Cygnian world by mere light minutes, leaving it untouched. The Crucible Ascendant emerged from the other side, its hull scarred but intact, a defiant beacon against the cosmic backdrop. No explanation was given, no boast made. Just a single, terse Terran transmission, anomaly mitigated. Task complete. The galaxy, once so confident in its understanding, was silent. Humanity wasn't just colonizing death planets, they were rewriting the rules of cosmic survival, turning universal forces into manageable challenges. They were not merely adapting to the harshness of the universe, they were becoming the harshness itself, a force as relentless and inevitable as the cosmos. The redirection of the null storm was not merely a feat of engineering, it was a cosmic declaration. The galactic consensus fractured. The Cygnian Concord, once the bastion of measured analysis, convened emergency sessions, their crystalline data matrices overflowing with impossible computations. The Cthar Collective, whose martial pride defined their existence, found themselves without a relevant strategic doctrine. Humanity was not an enemy to be fought, nor an ally to be courted in traditional terms. They were a phenomenon, a living testament to the universe's most brutal laws, and they had just demonstrated the terrifying extent of their mastery. The term, humanity problem, began to circulate in the deepest, most secure diplomatic channels. It wasn't a designation of threat, but of profound incomprehension. How do you negotiate with a species that thrives on conditions that shatter others? How do you deter a people who view pain as a blueprint for innovation? Their very existence on Kronos' Veil, Xylos Prime, and Acheron, the Crucible Worlds, as they were now colloquially known, was a constant, unsettling challenge to the established order. Observation Log, Concord Protocol 117 Theta, Sector Xylos Prime Orbital. Terran activity shows no sign of cessation. Infrastructure expands daily. Atmospheric processing units now operating at 150% efficiency, actively reducing atmospheric toxicity for local flora, not for human respiration. Analysis: humanity is not merely adapting to hostile environments, it is actively repurposing them for their own, currently undefined, long-term goals. This redefinition of colonization is unprecedented. The Crucible Worlds, once isolated strongholds, became interconnected. Veil jumps, short-range, highly precise temporal distortions generated by Kronos' Veil technology, allowed near-instantaneous transit between the three planets, bypassing conventional FTL limitations and making them a unified, self-sustaining nexus. Resources flowed freely, igneous ore from Xylos Prime was used to reinforce chrononexus structures, while glacier dust from Acheron powered the life support systems of the Prometheus Nexus. The shared hardship had forged a collective identity, the Crucible forged. Their culture was stark, pragmatic, and fiercely independent. The Xylos-born were known for their blunt honesty and unwavering resolve, their decisions made with the clarity of a plasma cutter. The Acheron dwellers cultivated a profound inner resilience, their calm bordering on indifference, their logic cold and irrefutable, born from the absolute silence of the deep void. The Veil Leapers, with their nonlinear perception of time, were the strategists, their insights appearing as sudden, terrifying leaps of logic to outsiders, but to them, simply the result of having already lived the optimal outcome. Their perception of the soft worlds, the temperate, resource-rich planets where most galactic species resided, was one of detached curiosity, occasionally tinged with a subtle, high IQ sarcasm. They respected the comfort, but saw it as a stagnation. A Cygnian envoy once offered a crucible-forged engineer a sample of a rare, stable atmospheric gas for a construction project. The engineer, after examining it, remarked, "Appreciated, but our current iteration operates best on methane and hydrogen fluoride. We find it more inspiring." The envoy, whose species communicated primarily through empathy, felt a flicker of something akin to pity, not for the human, but for his own kind, for their comfortable limitations. The true power of humanity was not their fleet strength, which was formidable but not overwhelming. It was their capability. They didn't threaten invasion, they simply existed, and in their existence, they redefined the very meaning of galactic power. The unique materials and technologies derived from the crucible worlds were now coveted across the galaxy. Reactionless drives, temporal stabilizers, and hyperdense alloys became the gold standard, but only humanity could reliably produce them. And they controlled the supply, not through embargoes, but through the simple fact that only they could survive the extraction process. The unspoken challenge hung heavy in the void. What would humanity do with this unprecedented mastery? They had proven they could bend the universe's most destructive forces. They had proven they could evolve beyond their perceived biological limits. The elder species, once secure in their ancient wisdom, now found themselves observing a species that operated on a different plane of existence, a species that had forged its own destiny not in the gentle cradle of a home world, but in the white-hot, crushing, freezing, time-bending embrace of the universe's ultimate tests. They had thought humans couldn't colonize harsh worlds. Now, humanity owned 3 death planets, their flags flying defiantly. And the galaxy, for the first time in millennia, truly feared what came next. Not because humanity was aggressive, but because they were utterly, terrifyingly, relentless. The galaxy, vast and ancient, now held its collective breath. The Cygnian Concord, once the undisputed intellectual authority, found its predictive algorithms collapsing. The Cthar Collective, whose might was once measured by the size of their fleets, now grappled with an adversary that defined power not by conquest, but by existence itself. The humanity problem was no longer a classification, it was the central, terrifying question echoing through every diplomatic channel, every strategic council. What were they? And what, precisely, did they want? The answer, unuttered by humanity, was slowly becoming self-evident through their actions. The crucible worlds, Xylos Prime, Acheron, Kronos' Veil, were not merely colonies. They were not merely resource hubs. They were not even just proving grounds. They were, in the stark, unyielding truth, forges. And humanity, the soft, fragile species of Earth's temperate cradle, had deliberately, relentlessly, thrown itself into the fires of cosmic adversity. Observation Log, Concord Protocol 117 Rho, Unidentified Terran Transmission Intercept. Subject, Internal Communication from Prometheus Nexus. Decrypted fragment, the pressure hones the blade. The cold tempers it. The flux makes it sing. They thought we were weak. They merely hadn't seen us sharpened. Analysis, highly abstract, potentially metaphorical. Suggests a deeper, intentional transformation. The profound realization began to dawn. Humanity had not merely adapted to these death planets. They had embraced them. They had sought out the crushing gravity, the absolute cold, the temporal chaos, not as obstacles to overcome, but as tools. Tools to sculpt themselves. The "pain is our blueprint" was not a poetic flourish, it was a literal engineering principle applied to their very species. The Xylos-born, those who lived under the perpetual roar and crushing weight of the Prometheus Nexus, were not merely resilient, their very physiology had begun to subtly shift. Their internal organs showed enhanced structural support, their bones denser, their musculature wired for efficient, high-G movement. They possessed an almost preternatural awareness of their surroundings, a constant, low-level vigilance against environmental threats that had become second nature. Their calm in crisis was not bravery, it was an innate understanding of chaos. They had learned to dance with the plasma storms. The Akron dwellers, the quiet, efficient architects of the chronovault, had refined their minds to operate with chilling precision in the absence of external stimuli. Their capacity for long-term planning, for intricate problem-solving, and for maintaining focus amidst isolation was unmatched. They had become masters of internal landscapes, their thoughts unburdened by the distractions of light and sound, finding clarity in the deep, frigid silence. They had learned to thrive in the void. And the Veil Leapers, the temporal navigators of Kronos' veil, were the most unsettling. Their perception of time had become so fluid, so multi-layered, that they could perceive multiple potential futures, multiple pasts, simultaneously. They were not just seeing possibilities, they were experiencing them, making their strategic decisions with an eerie certainty, as if they had already lived the outcomes. They had learned to bend time to their will. The galaxy had been so focused on the impossibility of humans colonizing these worlds that they had missed the terrifying implications of why they had done so. They thought humanity was simply stubborn, or tenacious, or even mad. They were wrong. Humanity had looked at the universe's most brutal challenges and seen not a deterrent, but a mirror. They had seen not extinction, but evolution. The final, chilling truth, confirmed by the increasingly frantic, fractured intercepts from the crucible worlds, was not about outward expansion. It was about inward transformation. Humanity had not conquered these worlds to expand their empire in the traditional sense. They had conquered these worlds to expand themselves. The death planets were not just conquered territory, they were living laboratories, accelerated evolutionary pressure cookers, designed to forge a new breed of human. They thought humans couldn't colonize harsh worlds. Now, we own 3 death planets. And in the process, we became the very essence of their harshness. We are the crushing gravity, the absolute cold, the temporal chaos. We did not merely survive these worlds, we became them. Pain wasn't our weakness, it was our blueprint. And the galaxy, for the first time, truly understood. We didn't colonize them despite their harshness. We colonized them because of it. The flags flying on Xylos Prime, Acheron, and Kronos' veil were not just symbols of territory. They were declarations of a species reborn, tempered, and utterly, terrifyingly, relentless. The soft worlds could never understand. But the universe's true frontiers, the places where life was meant to die, now hummed with the defiant, triumphant song of human industry. The lesson was brutal, and indelible. When you thought we were broken, we were merely building. When you thought we were defeated, we were merely learning. And when you thought we were gone, we were just beginning.